Hey everyone, Clay from clayviation.com. We're here in Smyrna, just outside of Nashville, ready to depart to head over to Shelbyville for a little bit of barbecue. Last time we did an engine startup, where we got the engine running here on the ramp in Smyrna, and today we're going to go through our departure, which is our taxi, our engine run-up, and our takeoff. Just a couple things to cover before we get going. I've got the resources you might need to follow along on the website, on the blog. The checklist can be downloaded from clayviation.com if you want to follow along using the same checklist that I'm using for the simulator. The airport diagram for Smyrna is also available for download in the link. And then you can also view the area map or the sectional chart of the area if you want to see some of the numbers we're looking at and some of the route that we're going to be flying. So we have our airplane running, and before we actually call up our ground control, I want to get a couple things set up as far as our avionics goes. In the simulator, one thing I like to do is toggle over to 3D flight mode, which is kind of handy here, but it actually gives you a little bit different perspective on the cockpit, and it lets you zoom in a little bit closer to some of these instruments. So we could use our GPS. I'm not going to today. We're going to instead use our VOR navigation, which we'll cover a little bit more. Which is going to be on this needle here, but on the next flight when we're actually in the air flying to Shelbyville. But one thing we're going to do here on the radio stack is go ahead and put in our frequency for the AWOS, which is our weather, 119.125. Got a big knob and a little knob here, and those control in the standby frequency here which numbers are flipped. So our big knob here is controlling the big number on the left, and then our little knob here is controlling the numbers on the right. So 119.125 is what we're looking for. Right here. And let's go ahead and flip that to our active.
Smyrna Information Echo. 1200 Zulu weather. Sky clear, visibility 23. Temperature 142.0. Wind calm, altimeter 2992. Arriving and departing runway 14. Advise on initial contact, you have echo.
Okay, I'd love to be able to explain every little thing about what you're hearing and seeing. I'm going to do my best to give you a good overview without getting into too many details. We're going to call up ground control in a moment here, and we're going to tell them we have information echo, which is that particular weather broadcast. Before we get too far, let me make sure our altimeter setting 2992, which is standard, is set here in our altimeter. And that's showing appropriate field elevation, which is a little over 500 feet. Let's go ahead and get ground control set up. Ground is 121.4. So if we go ahead and flip this over, 121.4. Flip that over. I can go down to my COM2 here and actually go ahead and put in tower, who we're going to talk to next, which is 118.5. And I can go and flip that into active. I've got COM1, that's what I'm talking on right now, 121.4 ground. COM2, I don't have active yet, but I can flip over when I'm ready to talk to them. So we'd make a call that's something like, our tail sign is 172 SP. We'd say Smyrna ground, Cessna 172 Sierra Papa at the Smyrna Flight Center with echo, ready for departure to the south. And they'd come back with something like Cessna 172 Sierra Papa, Smyrna ground, taxi via Juliet Kilo to runway 14, and I would read that back. Taxi Juliet Kilo to 14, Cessna 172 Sierra Papa. So let's go ahead and get back to our screen here. Now, when I taxi in the flight simulator, what I like to do is actually go to outside of the cockpit up here and get kind of an expanded view of what's around me. I would normally not obviously have this luxury, but the visibility in an actual airplane is much better. But this is a lot easier way to actually taxi. I have my airport diagram so I can see where I am and where I'm going on the road map, and I'm looking for Juliet and Kilo, and I'm going to go ahead and go. One last thing I'm going to do here is a brake check. So I'm actually going to release my brakes and then let it start rolling a bit, and then press my brakes and make sure that my brakes are working appropriately, which they are. So let's get rolling. We endeavor to taxi it no more quickly than a brisk walk, so we don't want to get going too quickly, but we're going to head on over here to taxiway Juliet, which I can see on the yellow sign there coming up. Right now I'm kind of taxiing through a big ramp area where there's a lot of aircraft tie downs and things, and in this version of Flight Simulator there's actually not a whole bunch of airport detail, which I'm okay with. I'd rather the flight dynamics be correct and all the information I need be in the simulator than the scenery. But you can see over there that it's showing us taxiway Juliet is to the left, and so is runway 14 to the left, which is what we're looking for. So throttle up just a touch here. Once we get here to the yellow lines, we endeavor to maintain our yellow center line. Keep that nose wheel right on it as much as possible, which is going to keep our wings well within the boundaries of the taxiway here. If we were flying a real airplane, of course we would be listening closely for any sort of chatter happening on ground control, trying to listen for any other airplanes, looking around for other airplanes that are coming down the way, and making sure that we're safe and away from any other traffic. Obviously there's no other traffic in this simulation, so that makes things fairly easy. It takes away a touch of realism, but the whole point of doing this is, in this case today, for entertainment, so you can kind of fly along and see what's going on, but also so that these procedures are kind of ingrained in us, and we go through the checklists and kind of practice those flows, so that it's kind of like singing along to a song. We are kind of learning the words and the motions and making it muscle memory for us. So we're coming up here. We should be coming up on taxiway Kilo according to my little diagram here. And that sign off to the left, the yellow J on the black background, shows us that we are on Juliet, as we should be, and Kilo there is to the left, and 14 our runway. So we'll go ahead and make our turn here onto Kilo. Now that we're on a straightaway, let me show you one thing in the real airplane we'd be looking at. Get back into the inside here. We would be looking to make sure that our little miniature airplane in that bottom left-hand instrument is swinging in the direction of our turn, and then the ball swings to the outside of our turn. That's a little instrument check we do, just to make sure everything's working correctly before we're actually up in the air and flying. Let's see if I can get these visuals set back up how I like it. We're going to stop a little short of the runway up here and do one last checklist before we take off, and it's called our engine run up. And what we're going to do is throttle the engine up a decent amount, and it's going to simulate basically a takeoff. And what we're doing is we're putting the engine at a high RPM and verifying that everything still looks good before we actually get out there and take off. It's going to let us catch any last minute problems. There's a lot of reasons we could abort a takeoff, which we'll go through in some future videos, a few of those reasons. But ultimately, if we get a bad feeling about anything, or if there's any indications that aren't looking good, we're going to bring the airplane back in and have somebody take a look at it. It is much better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than in the air wishing you were on the ground. So here we're coming up on our runway here. Some airports have a designated run-up area, a little place you can kind of pull off and get out of any sort of traffic. This particular section of our airport does not have that, so we're just going to simply kind of swing wide, turn the airplane a little bit. That way if another aircraft were to come behind us and we were running up with high RPM, they wouldn't get caught in the blast of wind that comes from the propeller, which is called prop wash. You can see there's a lot of time spent taxiing and waiting to actually get in the air. Okay. Pull our throttle out a bit here. Swing a little bit wide. Okay. Let's set the brakes. Let's go back in the cockpit so you can see what we're looking at. Got our throttle set to 1000 RPM. Don't want it too low there. Okay. Let's get you a good visual here and go through the before takeoff checklist. Parking brake set, Flight controls, free and correct. And what we're doing for that, let me zoom in so I can show you. We're actually going through and moving the yoke full spectrum of its motion to make sure that it's clear of everybody's knees and that all the controls are actually working correctly, that they weren't perhaps worked on and connected the wrong way, or that something hasn't malfunctioned, or birds built a nest, or anything crazy like that. So flight controls, free and correct. Flight instruments, check and set. Want to just make sure everything looks good here. Altimeter's reading 0, or airspeed indicator rather, indicating 0. We got level wings, and our attitude indicator here is upright. We're showing field elevation, and we have our altimeter setting in our little window here. Level wings here, and the ball is centered. And then we also have a heading that matches our heading just up here, which is just about north. And we have a 0 reading on our vertical speed indicator there. Our fuel quantity we'll check, which is about half tanks right here. I normally like to fly with full tanks. I did not go through the simulation of getting full gas here, but I do know that this is more than enough gas to get us over to Shelbyville. Mixture, let's check that it's rich, which is down here. It is in fact rich. Fuel selector valve is on both. Elevator trim, set for takeoff. I've got actually a little button I'll press here, which is going to set that for takeoff trim. And this is a wheel that you just spin here, and you set that for the takeoff setting, which is right where that line is right now. Okay, throttle up to 1700. So this is where we pull our power up, and we're looking right here on this tachometer here for our power settings. Okay, so the power goes to 1700. And our throttle is right down here. That's what's controlling that. Okay, so now that our throttle is set to 1700, we're going to check the magnetos first, which is here on our ignition switch. And what we're going to do is we're going to swing this over to left magneto. We're looking for a little drop, which we got a little drop in RPM, and then we go back to both, and we should get a rise back to 1700. You can kind of hear it a little bit. Now we're going to go over and go to the right mag, and we get a drop on the tachometer, back to both, and we get a rise. I won't explain all the nuances of that, but that is good. Just know that for now. Our suction gauge, let's check on our vacuum, which is in the green arc. That's good. Engine instruments, which are basically these instruments right here. We're checking to make sure our oil temperature is in the green and not too high, and our oil pressure is not too high or low. Our ammeter is here, and it is not showing a discharge, so ammeter is check. Annunciator panel, which are these lights up here, we're checking to make sure we don't have any warning lights going off. The only thing we have is our brakes, which is what we have set. And the throttle now comes back to 1000 RPMs. Pull that on back out. Okay, we'll look at some lights. Strobe lights on is required. Pop our strobe on, landing light. Turn that on as well. Radios and avionics. We'll go ahead and now switch over to COM2, which is our tower frequency. Get ready to talk to them. Wing flaps set for takeoff, which we have our flaps up, which is how we're going to take off today, and transponder to altitude, which this is kind of a funny transponder and doesn't actually have an altitude setting. So, but that's okay. For the purposes of our simulation, that doesn't make any difference. Our transponder is right here. We do have an autopilot in this airplane, which is actually kind of nice. We're not going to be using that today. So now we can actually go, and I'm going to go back outside of the cockpit here just so that I can adequately kind of see to get on the runway. And we're going to call up to tower. So we'd actually say something like, Smyrna Tower, Cessna 172 Sierra Papa is at runway 14, ready for departure. And they might come back and say something like, Cessna 172 Sierra Papa, Smyrna Tower, clear for takeoff, runway 14, departure to the south. And we'll read back, clear for takeoff 14, Cessna 172 Sierra Papa. Okay, we're ready to go. Now, we don't want to have any delay getting on the runway, but for the purposes of explanation, a couple quick things here. We're going to release our brakes, go ahead and start moving out to the runway area. We're going to want to check to make sure that we are visually clear of any aircraft that might be landing and just off of our kind of situational awareness that might be coming in on the approach or taking off on either side. So we're going to look hard left and right as we're coming out onto the runway. And then as we come out onto the runway and line up, I'm going to stop for just a moment and make sure that we're on the right runway. I know that sounds crazy, but you know, we might have gotten a little bit confused about what taxiway we're on, and we might not have actually gotten out onto the right runway. So I'm going to swing real wide here, use up every inch of the available runway as I can, and sure enough, runway 14. Okay, so let's get back in the cockpit and get ready to go here. We're runway 14, and we're going to add power smoothly to full, and we're going to maintain this center line. We're going to call out airspeed alive on our airspeed indicator. We're going to check to make sure our oil temperature and pressure are in the green. We're looking for 60 knots, which we're above, so we're going to go gently rotate. And we're going to climb out at about 80, which we've gotten very fast, but we'll pull back up and climb out to about 80. All right, we are flying. Next time, we're going to do our en route phase. We're going to navigate over to the Shelbyville Airport, land, and eat some delicious barbecue. Leave some comments below, give me your thoughts, give me your questions, and let's fly again soon. Thanks for watching.